Hi, welcome back. Well, as you can see, we're not out in the shop today, and that's because I had some minor surgery and I've kind of been banished to the basement for a few weeks to recover. But I would like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about some sharpening stones that I've purchased over the years. Most of these stones can still be found online, usually on eBay, for around $20 to $30. They're not what you're normally used to seeing. It might give you an idea for another direction to go for your sharpening needs.
Well, as we look at sharpening stones, the first thing you might notice is something like this old carborundum here that you might find in Grandpa's shed. This is a very classic stone, two-sided, pretty rough, more for sharpening pocket knives and those types of things, shears out in the shop, but not really good for sharpening the fine hand tools that you would see in today's woodworking shops. Although one side does appear to be a kind of a medium grit that might be usable. There are a number of these different types of hones out there. This carborundum is just one example. Another hone that I have sitting here is this large Norton, this is an aluminum oxide sharpening stone. And again, it's a reasonable grit on there, but not probably something that you would see a lot in the shop unless you're using it to establish an angle or a bevel or something like that, but not really a good polishing thing. The one thing I wanted to show you on this one was on the box here, it mentions the word vitrified. And all that means is that on man-made stones, they are usually heat treated and bonded similar to like pottery or something like that, where the abrasive is and the medium that it's holding it are bonded together so that it will wear a little bit better. If it's not heat treated, these stones will come apart rather quickly. There are two different types of stones, like I mentioned, man-made, and I have several examples of that, but I also have some natural stones, and I'll point those out when I come to them. Now, a lot of stones you see are like this one. This is an Acme oil stone. I'm not even going to open the box just because it looks like them all. The main thing here in this case is because this one specifies that it's an oil stone, it usually means that it has been saturated with oil, usually at the factory, and you need to always use oil with it. If you look at this Norton Queer Creek stone here, and I'm hoping you can make this out, but along the top it says oil and water stone. And basically most stones are this way. If they don't have anything on them, you can choose whether to use oil or water with that stone. But whatever you use, you have to stick with that throughout the life of the stone. Now this stone right here, like I mentioned, is a natural stone. It's just kind of a sandstone. A lot of people call them mudstones. Not much better than for sharpening an old pocket knife or something like that, but kind of fun to have around. Here's another stone. It's a Chinese stone, and you'll see that it says whetstone on it, W-H-E-T. Now that doesn't mean it's for water. It just wet, spelt that way, is just another way of saying a sharpening stone. This is a natural stone, and again, not the highest quality, but one you just kind of falls into your collection and you keep around because it is kind of unique. Some of the stones that I have found over the years that I found do work well out in the shop. This is another natural stone. This is actually a Belgian hone. This is really good for standing up a fine edge. It actually has garnet in it for the abrasive, and they actually use this for sharpening scalpels and other surgical tools. These can be very expensive. They do come in a variety of sizes though. Here's a larger example of the same stone. This one isn't in quite as good a shape, but it does do an okay job for what I'm looking for. While we're talking about natural stones, here's a Norton granite hone, and this is for a razor, straight razor, and this is probably smoother than glass. This is extremely fine. I don't know, it might be in the 16,000 grit category. This is not something you really want to use out in the shop. Normally you can go to about 8,000 is more than what you really want to do. You can go a little bit higher. Most razor hones that I have in my collection go to between 10 and 12,000 grit. They do a really nice job of polishing a stone, but this one I think is just too fine for what you're asking it to do. Now here we have an old pike strope hone, and this one actually has a sharpening stone, a razor hone on one side, and on the other side it has a leather strop, so that when you are done sharpening on one side you can just turn it over and actually do your stropping on the other side of the hone. This particular stone may have some useful application in your shop. If you do any stropping on, say, your chisels or that sort of thing, you would have like a quick touch-up side, really stand up an edge, and then you could stroke hone it on, or use the strope on the other side. Now, one of the things you might want to take into account is that these hones are not very big, so they don't work well with a lot of jigs. However, in this case with this Swati, there is a larger version available out there for it that you could use with a jig. But again, you're looking at 10 to 12,000 grit, probably not something you're going to use a lot in your shop unless you really want to stand up an edge. One of the hones that I found to be useful out in the shop is this old Reliance hone. Now, it's only marked on the box, and that's the only way I knew it to be a Reliance hone originally, although I have found several of these hones online in antique form. Now, they do have a bit of reputation going with them, so they actually started to remake them here about 15 years ago, and here's one that I purchased, and it's still wrapped up. I have no need to use it just yet. I have used other of the new ones. They're not as good as the originals, but they still work okay in the shop. Now here you have one side that is probably 4,000 to 6,000 grit, and then the other side once again gets you up into that higher grit. Probably not the 12,000, but this is more of a 10,000 grit side over here. So this is a hone I actually use out in my shop and does a good job. So if you have an opportunity, even though, you know, I can honestly say the newer ones aren't as good as the old ones, you know, for 15 bucks or whatever for this, for the newer version, it's worth it. It's an okay hone for working out in the shop. Here's another hone. This is a Punjab hone, and this was, I believe, made in India and imported to the States. That actually does a pretty good job. I don't use a lot because I have enough other hones to use out in the shop. However, this one was remade a few years ago, and this is actually still available commercially. This is used a lot by the axemen as kind of an intermediate hone. This would be for like your Stihl timber sports competitors, that sort of thing. So these are available. Not something I would recommend that you use in the newer version of the Punjab, but if you can get your hands on an original version, they aren't bad. Haven't seen a lot of these available online, but they do come up occasionally. You're probably, because of the rarity, you're probably going to pay a little bit more for these. Now, in reality, I've never paid more than about $40 for a hone, and usually much less than that. I do have some stones that I paid more for, but it had more to do with the provenance of the hone itself than anything else. Now, here's another hone that's kind of unique. This is a glass razor hone, and all this is etched glass. It's probably not as fine as the granite hone we looked at earlier, but it's right up there. Probably 14,000, 13,000 grit, something like that. Probably wouldn't use it out in the shop, but it is kind of fun to have. Now, one of the things you might notice is that I have a lot of wooden boxes for these hones. I built a jig for making them. One of these days I'll blow the dust off of that jig maybe and show you how it works so that you can make something that would be useful in your shop. So here's another oil hone. This one actually happens to be a slip hone. As you can see, the radius is in the taper on it. Great for working with gouges and sharpening, those types of things. I don't do a lot of carving, so I don't have a lot of use for it, but I do like to keep it around. One of the hones that might be useful out in your shop is an old combination hone. These tend to have varying grits on either side, and usually the rougher side is more appropriate for working in the shop. So here we have a Norton combination hone. This is actually a Pike combination hone. There is another Norton combination hone. They're highly prized stones, and they usually run around $1,000. This one you can usually pick up. I notice they're selling for about $100 right now. It's okay, and the rough side could be used out in the shop. It's probably in that 9,000 grit area, and then the other side is much finer, probably in the, like I say, the 10 to 12,000 grit. Another hone similar to this one is this Craftsman hone. I think this is actually probably a little bit finer. And in this case, the black side on this one actually happens to be the really fine side, and the red side is a little bit coarser, but even this side is probably 10,000 grit and this side's 12,000 grit. So again, not something that's really useful out in the shop unless you really want to stand up an edge. Now this hone is a double-aught frictionite, and this is one of the hones I use a lot out in my shop. The fine side is up to around 12,000 grit, and even the coarse side is probably 8,000 or 9,000 grit. But this does a really good job cutting the metal, even at these high grits. It does a good polished edge and will establish that fairly quickly. The problem with these, when I was buying and selling them, I would buy them for $20 and sell them for $30. Now they're selling for around $300 a piece online. If you can find one, I would certainly suggest you buy it, but I wouldn't suggest paying $300 for it. Just some additional hones here I want to show you real quick. First of all, this is a Pike wireless hone, and this has a bunch of divots in it. These are made by a variety of companies. The idea was that when you ran a razor hone over this, it would take off that fine wire edge that would develop as you were honing. I haven't found it to be really useful in the shop, although this one is a little bit heavier grit, and I'll just flip it over and use the back side and not worry about using this side here. Some other hones that are just kind of fun to collect. Here we have an Old Glory hone. And I don't know if you can see this, but they all have an embossing on them. And this one just says Old Glory. I have a variety of these. This one happens to be an American hone. We'll open that up. You can see there's an eagle there that has says American hone underneath it. Kind of another fun hone here is a keen cutter hone. Now I own a keen cutter axe, and I think I have a keen cutter saw as well. So it's just kind of fun to have a stone made by the same company as well. Don't really use it, although once again it's in that 10 to 12,000 grit range, and does a nice job really standing up a fine edge. Another hone I have here is just a Craftsman hone. It's similar to the combination Craftsman razor hone we looked at, although it's just one-sided. And again, that tends to be in the roughly, I don't know, 9,000–10,000 grit range right there. And again, we just have a variety of Norton hones that I've collected over the years that do an okay job, but once again, I wouldn't recommend purchasing. Well, I hope this look at these stones has helped you out a little bit. A couple of things real quick. First of all, most of these stones aren't going to be real good if you're using jigs for sharpening. A little bit too small for that. And for the most part, razor hones are just a little bit too fine for what you would want in a typical shop. One of the things to remember is in order to keep your hone working the best it can is you've got to keep it clean, keep the metal filings off of it. That means using lots of either liquid or oil to keep those metal filings coming off. You also can use a rub stone. This will create a slurry, or it can also be used to dress a hone. Another thing you can do if you don't have a rub stone is you can just take two hones of similar grit and rub those together, usually under water, and that will help dress the stones and keep them flat as well. There are a number of places that you can find good hones. eBay, garage sales, and even antique stores have worked well for me. And if you look long enough, you can find some good hones in the $20 to $30 range. Now, the information I've given you today is not exhaustive, and there's a lot more information about hones, and I really don't want to go too much into sharpening because there's 1,000 videos out there. There are a lot of places you can go if you have more questions about specific stones. The internet is wonderful for finding out a lot of that information. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me. Until next time, keep it level, plumb, and square.